Hello, and welcome back to the Girls in Action podcast.
We're your hosts, Naya.
Brianna.
Melissa.
And I'm Nava. So we haven't been together in a while, so what are some of y'all's hobbies that you've been doing lately during quarantine?
So during quarantine, I've been exercising a lot more and just taking some time to practice basketball daily.
Oh, that sounds so fun. I wish I could say I've been doing more movement type stuff, but I've really been doing a lot more collaging. I've gotten into like cutting stuff out of magazines and sticking them together. So that's been pretty fun and therapeutic.
That is so cool. I love that. I plan on journaling like movies this summer, just like movie reviews, which is awesome. But my new quarantine hobby is actually meditating. I found it to be very calming and peaceful, and I think it's just a good way to ground me during this, such a crazy and hectic year. So today we'll be talking about greenwashing. So what is greenwashing exactly? The term greenwashing was coined by New York environmentalist Jay Westervelt in a 1986 essay regarding the hotel industry's practice of placing placards in each room that promoted the reuse of towels in order to, quote unquote, save the environment. He noted that little to no effort toward reducing energy waste was being made by these institutions, as evidenced by the lack of cost reduction this practice effected. And he suggested that this actual objective of this quote unquote green campaign was for increased profit. And that kind of came to birth of greenwashing, which is a play on words, which is called whitewashing. So it's also called green sheen, and it's a form of marketing in which green marketing and green PR are deceptively used to persuade the public that an organization's product and like strategies and policies are environmentally friendly and conscious. So greenwashing strategies are in reality just corporate deception. And while greenwashing is not new, its use has increased over recent years to meet consumer demand for environmentally friendly goods and services. But the problem here, it's compounded by lax enforcement by regulatory agencies such as the FTC in the US. So there really can't be a lot done or something to be held accountable by officials. And that's just annoying.
Thank you, Melissa, for that introduction. And a big reason why people are becoming more interested in green products is because climate change is becoming a much larger issue. And climate change, as we all know, is shifts in weather patterns caused mainly by human emissions of greenhouse gases. So the impacts of climate change include floods in certain areas while droughts devastate in others, an increase in waterborne diseases, oceans becoming more acidic because it absorbs 30% of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. Temperatures will continue to rise, hurricanes will grow in intensity, and sea levels will rise 1 to 8 feet. And lastly, the Arctic is susceptible to becoming ice-free. So there are many large impacts of climate change, and we should do our part to ensure that we can help slow the spread.
Thank you, Naya. That's super important, and especially with last month's theme of, Earth Awareness Month, but now like we need to think about how, we need to protect the planet every day. It's not just a day or a month. And with that being said, going back to greenwashing a little bit, so there are 7 sins of greenwashing, which is, I guess, made up by this environmental marketing agency called TerraChoice. So the first sin is the sin of the hidden trade-off, which is committed by suggesting a product that's green based on an unreasonably narrow set of attributes without attention to other important environmental issues. And then there's the sin of no proof, which is committed by an environmental claim that can't really be like substantiated by supporting information or by a reliable third party. So like maybe a brand might say, oh, we are eco-friendly, but they don't really back up like what they say, right? Third is the sin of vagueness, which is kind of like very poorly defined, and they have like a broad meaning of like what their values are. Like they, as I was saying before, they might say, oh, we're eco-friendly, or we donate to like this charity, and it might be misleading. Fourth is the sin of worshiping false labels. So that's when brands have words or images that gives the impression of a third-party endorsement where no such endorsement exists. So they could supposedly Photoshop like celebrities onto like their products and like say, oh, we endorse this and it's eco-friendly and stuff like that, but it's not. And then fifth is the sin of irrelevance, which is the claim, they make an environmental claim that may be truthful, but it's unimportant or helpful for consumers seeking environmentally preferable products. And then sixth is the sin of lesser of two evils, which is, it might be true in the product category, but it risks distracting customers from like the greater environmental impact of that category. So yeah. And then last of all is the sin of fibbing. So it says that it's the least frequent sin, but it's committed by making environmental claims that are simply false. So maybe there could be some sort of company that says, oh, we make like, for example, jeans with using a cup of water or something. And that just might not be true at all, which is terrible. And so greenwashing, therefore, is a mask used to cover up unsustainable corporate agendas and policies.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And speaking of companies using eco-friendly claims as a mask, BP, or British Petroleum, is an oil company, and their ads create false impressions that the oil company is moving to renewable energy. So many environmental lawyers have called out BP for greenwashing their ads, and they seem to be moving to renewable energy in their ads, but it actually has large investments with oil and gas. So they describe gas as cleaner burning and that they want to make energy cleaner, but 96% of BP's expenditure is on oil and gas. And also, the environmental lawyers are calling on the UK government to ban fossil fuel advertising unless it comes with a warning regarding the dangers of climate change. This warning would be similar to a smoking advertisement where it lists the health risks that come. And as we're thinking about this, we should just remember that BP is among the top 5 oil companies in the world, but it is being called out for greenwashing.
I love that you brought up BP. I was also going to talk about that company in particular because, like you said, they're one of the top oil companies in the world, and oil companies in particular are super bad at all the climate stuff, right? When we talk about climate change and burning of fossil fuels, it's usually associated with oil companies. And so on the topic of British Petroleum, a really interesting thing that I think connects to greenwashing a lot is BP's shifting blame of the climate crisis from companies like themselves onto consumers. It was definitely a marketing ploy that they did. They made this whole campaign in 2004. They released what's called the carbon footprint calculator. And this calculator basically allowed individuals or consumers, like everyday people, to quantify how much their daily activities or practices or homes or whatever contributed to the heating of the earth, right? To rising temperatures. And so shortly after they dropped this carbon footprint calculator, the term carbon footprint became totally integrated into our everyday lexicon. I don't know about you guys, but I hear the word, what's your carbon footprint all the time, or like, how can I reduce my carbon footprint? And so on the surface, you know, this seems like a cool thing because you can look at your own impacts and you can figure out what about your lifestyle you can change to, you know, help stop climate change. That's a cool thing. And individual action, of course, is important. But what's ironic and kind of frustrating about this whole thing is that when they released this calculator, it totally shifted the narrative and kind of took attention away from their own actions and the way that the oil companies whose drilling practices are super responsible for so much of the carbon emissions that are feeding global warming. And it shifted the conversation away from their mistakes and or not even mistakes, but their wrongdoings, right? Their responsibility. And instead it's this company that's telling individuals that if they want to save the earth, you know, they need to stop using plastic silverware or they have to bike to work. And it's like, yeah, those things are good. but the reality is these huge companies have so much more power than we do to stop this climate crisis. And we are doing what we can, and that's of course important, but it's almost this guilt trip that's being pushed on us by this company who has way more power to stop it than we do. So that's why it can be frustrating when in discourse about climate change, the crisis is treated as this kind of collective challenge where we all have to work together. But then individual consumers like us will totally change our lifestyles to do our part. But then these destructive companies, fossil fuel companies, also fashion companies, they can just stick a green label on one of their products and continue exploiting the planet and continue exploiting people. And that's the sum of their taking responsibility. So yeah, I think it's just kind of frustrating.
Yes. Oh my goodness, Brianna, that needs to be talked about more. And as you were saying, it really ties in with that whole concept of fast fashion. In particular, take the example of H&M's recycling program. They state that they'll take the textiles from your old clothes and recycle them to make new clothes, but that's simply not possible. So I did some research, and there was this interview for CBC News where this reporter talked to this author and journalist who was an expert on fashion and sustainability. And she said that in reality, only 1% of clothing can be genuinely recycled. And that's because most clothing fabric is a blend of many different types of fibers, which are really hard to separate once blended. And as well, fibers like cotton and wool are super hard to recycle because their quality goes down greatly once recycled. So it won't be, I guess, as good of a quality, and therefore might not be sold by stores. And H&M, they also offer 15% off your next purchase when you recycle your clothes with them. But that just encourages people to shop more at their stores for clothing that's not sustainable. And it just creates a cycle that's only beneficial to H&M itself and not good for the cause for sustainability or really saving the environment.
Melissa, I totally agree. And a huge part that impacts fast fashion is cost. And the high cost of clothes influences people to get clothes that look like the clothes that they want, but that they're not able to afford, but are made of less durable materials and sometimes aren't eco-friendly or use child labor. A good example of this is a company called Brandy Melville, which I'm sure y'all have heard of. Brandy Melville is very expensive but has good quality clothing for most girls aged 13 to 21. Anyways, some people are not able to pay these prices. So when people can't buy Brandy Melville's clothes, they go to a company with lower prices. Shein is a company that's clothes look a lot like Brandy Melville and are way cheaper. These clothes may have worse material, but some of their shirts are $10 or less. Shein is making zero effort on being eco-friendly. Now, some of these companies are not always environmentally friendly, like Shein, and Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen and Audi use greenwashing language about their cars, saying they were earth-friendly and used fewer greenhouse gases than gasoline. Despite their words and labels, some of Mercedes vehicles emit more of the dangerous oxides of nitrogen than advertised. And for Volkswagen, their plaintiffs pollute the environment at levels far in excess of the legal limit. Mercedes and Volkswagens were gatekeeping this information from people until some people filed a complaint about it.
Great examples, Nava, and I'm so glad that you talked about clothing companies and car companies because they are a huge contributor and they do greenwash often. Some general companies that I'm sure we've all heard of include some companies like Simple Green, Green Pen, Nestle Chocolate, and SeaWorld. So Simple Green cleaning products claim to be non-toxic when their products have harmful ingredients for both people and the environment. Green Pan Cooking claims to be environmentally friendly, but their products are made of a metal that does not disintegrate. Nestle Chocolate claims to have sustainably sourced chocolate, but their supply chains have no environmental standards in place. And lastly, SeaWorld claims to have a fun and interesting simulated environment for the killer whales, when in reality, their whales are held captive and treated extremely poorly.
Lots of companies that are greenwashing right now and have been greenwashing for a long time. And a whole nother topic in the eco-friendly category is cars. Cars have made a huge impact on climate change ever since 1886. Cars produce exhaust as a result of the combustion of fuels like gasoline. The exhaust emitted from these cars does huge damage to the environment, causing global warming, acid rain, and potential damage to human and animal health. However, we have exceptionally evolved from 1886 and have thought of new and improved cars and ways to emit less gas. We have started carpooling more frequently, more people are riding their bikes, and advanced technology has helped create electrical cars or hybrids. We all have probably heard of these fully electric cars called Teslas that came out in 2008. These cars are fully electric, produce no exhaust, and are great for people or families who want to go greener. However, these cars can cost from $39,000 to $80,000. For some middle-class people and families, that's half as much as they make a year. And Teslas are not the only things that are overpriced but better for the earth. Bamboo or metal straws, fabric napkins, reusable bags that are usually made out of cotton or cloth, organic fruit and vegetables, and just alternatives to normal things in our daily lives. In general, eco-friendly things are more expensive, and consumers are willing to pay up to 5% more for environmentally friendly products.
Yes. Thank you so much for bringing this to light, Nava. It's really true that some eco-friendly things are just more expensive than others, and it's really kind of like there's no reason why. But to zoom in a little bit, we're going to explore the psychological effects and reasons of why people are more inclined to buy eco-friendly. So researchers have found that products that are truly environmentally friendly are perceived significantly more favorably than their greenwashed counterparts, as Nava was saying. And consumers are more likely to perceive the price of an item marketed as green as a sacrifice while evaluating greenwashed products. So consumer perceptions of greenwashing are also found to be mediated by the level of greenwashing that they're exposed to. So to back that up, other research suggests that few consumers are actually noticing that greenwashing happening, and particularly when they perceive that company or brand as reputable or kind of name brand that everyone knows. So when customers perceive green advertising as credible, they develop more positive attitudes towards that brand, even when the advertising is greenwashed. And consumers are not aware of greenwashing in advertising, and they trust that green advertisements that they're true when they're actually being deceptive. Like, as I was saying, H&M, or even this company that makes phone cases, which is called Pila cases, and they say, oh, it's all made of like recycled plastic or whatnot, right? But still, other research suggests that consumers with higher green concerns are more able to tell the difference between honest green marketing and greenwashed advertising. So the higher the green concern, the stronger the intention will be for not purchasing from companies from which they perceive greenwashing advertising behavior. So that was just really interesting when I was kind of looking that up, and I didn't really know that there was a bunch of psychological aspects and effects. But I guess now to wrap it up, we're going to have some call to actions, and we're going to kind of summarize everything and give some great resources on how to be a better advocate for the environment.
Yes, thank you, Melissa. I totally agree that the psychological effects are super interesting, because I think it shows how it's the companies that are doing this greenwashing, but it shows how it really affects each individual. But yeah, so in this episode, we talked mostly about these really large companies like BP or Tesla or others that are involved in greenwashing and exploiting land and people for corporate profit. So again, individual changes are important, and we're going to talk about some of those later. But the biggest issue right now is really putting pressure on those companies because they're the ones that are responsible. Something interesting that I saw right before we get into the calls to action is since the pandemic started, right, people have been driving a lot less, eating out a lot less, obviously not traveling very much. And all of these things are what we usually talk about as practices that increase the effects of climate change, right? And carbon emissions and all of that. So what's really interesting to me is that since the pandemic started, you would expect that because people are doing these things less, that carbon emissions would be going down. But the reality is that global carbon emissions just overall have hardly changed since the pandemic. And that's because these oil companies and these coal burning companies and industrial agriculture, all of those things are still going on. And those are the main polluters and the main creators of carbon emissions. So I just thought that was interesting that those haven't really changed at all, despite so much individual changes, I guess. So yeah, individual change is important, but also calling out those companies is going to be super important as well.
Yes, totally. Thank you for calling those out. And I think that individual change, as you were saying, is really important. And there definitely are like some big leaders that have done their part or done more than others to kind of improve the, I guess, mindfulness and, wellness of the world. So I have just a couple of AAPI environmentalists because it is AAPI Heritage Month and also Mental Health Awareness Month. So I'm going to shout a couple of those leaders out. So first we have Mia Yoshitani. So she's an executive director of Asian Pacific Environmental Network, which is called APEN. And she has been building the environmental justice movement since she was a student. And she participated in the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit in 1991. And she was on the drafting committee of the original Principles of Environmental Justice, which was kind of a defining document for the environmental justice movement. Next up, we have Varshini Prakash. So she is the executive director of Sunrise Movement. And the Sunrise Movement is a movement of young people who are rising up to stop climate change and create millions of good jobs in the process. And this movement has really been integral in leading the fight in advancing the Green New Deal. So she has been very important and contributed a lot towards that. And then lastly, we have Andrea Chu. So she's a Taiwanese American who organizes Asian American Coalitions for Climate Justice. She was originally the Midwest Regional Organizer with Food and Water Action, and she's currently leading the charge for truly multiracial coalition building and other organizations in Chicago and the Midwest area. And she also founded the Chicago Asian Americans for Environmental Justice Coalition. So that's amazing. I am so inspired by these people. I think that they're doing great work. And I think that Gen Z will be up next and we will be doing just as amazing work. And yeah, there's still a long way to go.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa. We'll be putting all of these people that Melissa just mentioned, as well as a few others, into an infographic post on our Instagram. So be sure to look out for that. Education is a huge piece of action. But beyond that, as I talked about earlier, I think putting social pressure on companies is also super important. It's totally been proven that social pressure from just everyday people can damage reputations of companies, and then which decreases their profits. And so these companies, because their main priority is often profit, when their profits are damaged, this gives them little choice but to address the demands of the people who are asking something of them, because if they want to keep making profits, they have to rebuild that reputation in a meaningful way that addresses the issues that we're calling out, right? So there are all kinds of different ways that we've seen this be successful. Social pressure can look like a ton of different things. You can protest with art, with music, with poetry. There are physical protests you can go to, stuff like that. But yeah, just really calling out those companies and making it widely known what it is that they're doing wrong. And so just as a general idea, I think it's hard sometimes when we're talking about huge companies like this who seem so far out of reach. And there's this kind of assumption that just because we've been doing things like this for such a long time, and drilling for oil and burning coal is how we get a lot of our energy, there's this assumption that it's unrealistic to try to change anything in a radical way right now. But I think it's really important to try to push beyond that idea that we can't make radical changes, because the radical change is the only thing that's really going to help us at this point. And we need to start calling out those companies to change their practices and fundamentally change their practices, because they're just so harmful. So yeah, just a little reminder. And Nea's going to get into some individual changes you can make. I'm going to shout out one of them is this search engine that I used. Basically, it's called Ecosia. It's like Google, but it's a little bit different because every search that you make, I think after you make 45 searches, Ecosia, the company, will plant one tree for every 45 searches that you make. Super easy, super simple. I probably search hundreds of thousands of things every single day. So yeah, it's a great way to do your own little part. But yeah.
Thank you, Brianna. And Ecosia sounds absolutely cool, and I would love to try that out. So, as we've talked about today, companies are a large contributor to the effects of climate change. But if you have the ability and the resources, there are individual actions that you can take to help the Earth. So, some ways to limit carbon footprint, your carbon footprint, is carpooling. And of course, during COVID, this is not as easy to do. But once we're back into our routine, carpooling is a great way to limit your carbon footprint. You can ride your bike instead of driving when it's a short distance. And another thing within your house is you can invest in energy efficient appliances, consider getting solar panels, and not setting your thermostat too high or low. If you are able to, it is great to eat organic and locally produced food and cut back on beef and dairy products. And another way to reduce your carbon footprint is to watch your water usage and ensure that you reuse and recycle. And lastly, there is a footprint calculator, and we want to make sure that we emphasize that it's mainly companies that are contributing to climate change, but there are individual things that you can do. No guilt is wanted in this. So this carbon footprint calculator just shows you where you are producing the most, where you're contributing the most to climate change, and how you can just switch those little things in your life so that you can be more eco-friendly.
Yes, Naya, these are amazing examples. I will definitely be following them. And yeah, I mean, we can all do a little bit of something, but we definitely have to hold those companies accountable, as Brianna said. But you know, it's May, so May is also Mental Health Awareness Month. So I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about that. So here on the podcast, we will be having a couple of activities going on. So on our blog, I'll be starting the Wellness Corner. So that's kind of going to be a little column where I talk about the origins of kind of Mental Health Month and mental awareness, and how to cope or how to support your friends, how to support others and be there for them and just be an active listener. I will also be doing a mini episode, so this is just a little teaser. I hope to have it out soon in time for finals, because it's going to be all kind of how to cope with finals themed. And then also I'll be focusing on going back to school in the fall and just how to really deal with that, because it's just been such a hectic year, and we just need to ease into it a little bit. But yes, I'm very excited for this month, and I think it's just really important to have a month that honors and commemorates such an important just aspect of life. So yay!
Yes, thank you so much, Melissa. If y'all don't know, Melissa talks about a lot of the mental health stuff on this podcast because she wants to be a psychologist. That's her interest. Yeah. So she's going to be amazing at that. But yeah, definitely check out her mini episodes. But yeah, thank you all for all of these calls to action, all of this good information. We definitely should start holding these companies accountable. So thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Girls in Action podcast. As always, you can check us out on our Instagram. It's at girlsinaction.sf. We also have a blog where I run a book club. And as Melissa said, she's going to be kicking off her wellness corner pretty soon. I know mental health stuff is crazy right now. Everyone's stressing out. Everyone has things going on. So definitely check that out and see if you can get some meaningful help there. That's all going to be on our blog. So you can check out the blog either at the link in our Instagram bio or by visiting girlsinactionsf.blogspot.com. Again, that is girlsinactionsf.blogspot.com. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.